and we can move into the next fireside chat with Subset Games. Hi, Justin and Matthew.
Hello.
Hello.
Right.
We're doing a terrible job in promoting us slightly too late.
You're doing it live.
Yeah.
Preview event fashion. Excellent. Well, welcome to the preview event. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having
us.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we can get right into it. I guess if you want to kind of introduce yourselves a bit, maybe Justin, you want to go first?
Sure, I'm Justin Ma. Matt and I made Subset Games about 10 years ago, when we started with FTL, and then our more recent game is Into the Breach. I do most of the art and half of the design.
Cool. And Matthew?
And I did all the programming up until relatively recently, and half the design work as well. We 2 or 3 years ago added our first full-time additional team member, Mauro, who is a better programmer than I, to fill in my gaps in terms of to port the game and the like.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and so we've been getting some questions and some excitement from people ahead of time, and yeah, I mean, we can just dig in, I guess. So one question that someone asked that I actually found really interesting, and so we're getting into like just design meatiness right away, is Into the Breach, part of what's really interesting is how much information the player has at all times. But the very first turn, when you're putting your mechs down, is when it feels like you don't know a lot. You don't know where kind of the Vec are going to come up. Was that kind of an intentional thing, or what was the thought in terms of like your very first turn in Into the Breach? You have very little information, and then everything else feels like you know everything.
I think when you have a lot of information on that turn, or like pre-turn, what you're trying to do is guide or predict what the enemy is doing. So like Fire Emblem, you stand in a space to make someone else stand in a different space and attack. And so you have to you're trying to be guiding the AI. And you can do that Into the Breach a little bit, but we really didn't want that to be the focus. We wanted the focus to be like, here is a puzzle that you can see right now. Do what you can with it. I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but I think it lined up with what we were trying to do. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, in that first pre-turn, the enemies aren't going to attack anything. You're not given any less information than you're given in any other turn. It's just kind of a fuzzy, weird place because you're in between turns. You never know in advance where the enemy is going to move and queue. That's kind of 2 turns in advance then. And so I think it came down to just always presenting the same information we've always presented. And the drop-in point, there's not much to tell. And I agree with Justin that obviously exploiting the AI, figuring out its patterns and trying to make them go places and do things is something I do when I play Into the Breach, and I expect players to do. But it was never intended as the focus, and you wouldn't want to put too much emphasis on that.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. Excellent. Such like on the ball questions for just immediately this like extremely specific design of like in one of your games on one specific part. Why'd you do it?
It is. It's a really common complaint though. And it's an interesting one to me because it's not something that's ever troubled me. I've seen a lot of forum posts and stuff of like, I don't even understand the strategy. Heck, I think when we were doing the port for the mobile version, we actually got a bug report queued from Netflix that a QA on the Netflix side said, this must be a bug. I don't know what the strategy is for deployment. There's no information here, and it seems like random chance. And I feel like there is enough there you can do with it in terms of setting up your melee mechs close and your range mechs far, staying out of range of scorpions, et cetera, to kind of prep for the future turns. But yeah, it does seem to be something that confuses people. I'm not sure what we could do to improve that.
Maybe we could have like let people know that like, if you stand far enough away from this guy, he won't web you,
Yeah.
Maybe.
But even then, like, I'm cool with the enemies webbing me. I'd rather them web me than the buildings. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. Have there been any other cases like that in terms of like unexpected level of opinions as bugs, or that kind of like reactions where you have to find that balance of, do you stick to your design guns, or do you say like, okay, fair point?
There's a lot of stuff that's just simply some people want to play a different game, and the game that they want to play would probably be fine, but it's just not necessarily what we want to make. So there's definitely some level of just, well, maybe this could have a happy middle ground, but it's kind of what we wanted to do. So sorry.
Or I also feel like sometimes it's a failure on our part to have the information ready for the player to understand what our intention was. Like in that drop-in case, like I guess we've done a bad job introducing drop-in and the elements available to the player when they're doing the drop-in. So it makes it feel like there's nothing going on there. And so there's kind of sometimes a failure on our side, not just a design difference.
Sure.
And I had something else that I've completely forgotten now.
Is there ever a case where it's kind of a flip, where you've gotten kind of feedback or seen people doing something while playtesting that made you realize like, hey, like there's something I can kind of take from that, or hey, this is working kind of even better than I thought, let me expand on it?
Yeah, I mean, all the time, but largely some of the biggest stuff we learned was just how little people understand something that we thought was pretty clear. And then we have to go and make it super, super clear and fix the UI and fix hide stuff or show stuff. And so getting people, it's hard when you know the game back and front, but like figuring out how to get the player to the point that we want them to, where you can actually start enjoying the game, was definitely hard and required watching a lot of people.
It was one that we were putting in front of like early friends and stuff, and Into the Breach was painful to watch early players play. They just didn't get it. It didn't make any sense. Like they didn't know what to expect from the game, what they're supposed to be doing in the game. And it wasn't a case of the design being bad. It was a case of the presentation being problematic. And stuff like the animated tooltips made a massive difference for the capacity for that. I think I caught the end of Casey's interview, and he was also talking a lot about UX and presentation and things. And it's stupid how much time we have to spend making games like Side Spire or like Into the Breach. Half of it, maybe more, it feels like it's a UX challenge more than anything.
Yeah, which is interesting. I guess I'm curious how you approach the development process for that, in terms of like, yeah, there's that you want to get feedback quick, but then without the the level of presentation, it can be hard to get the feedback that you would get if the presentation was there. So was there a way that you dealt with that, in terms of like, do you just front load the presentation whether or not that's going to be a feature you keep, or
probably the opposite. I think we do the most hardcore serious game possible and then make it more approachable later. I think early on we largely just ask other developers and people who are very familiar with our work to play test the game, and they have the capacity, or they're pretty good at like picturing what it will look like in the end and just sort of giving us a lot of leeway. So
and not being as confused by those mechanics that might jump out or be strange to someone who didn't play as much or doesn't do as much development.
Yeah, cool.
But every single time I think we release, to go back to just on the subject of design differences when we release stuff, the community and the Reddit forums and the Discord always have issues with what we've done. And the recent one, or the one that comes up over and over because we keep changing it, is the weapon cost and power cost and store presentation and availability. And we made yet another change to that in this most recent update, and it had a lot of people unhappy with us. And in those cases, we have I've repeatedly explained our logic behind it, and we've stuck to our guns in terms of from our play testing, we liked it. But it's pretty rare that we hear anything that we're just like, nope, they're idiots, we're not going to listen to them. Every complaint is valid. It's just, is it a design issue? Is it a presentation issue? Is it where can we find the middle ground and make it work for everyone?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Looking at some of the audience questions, of which there are quite a few. One is like flipping back to FTL. Zerxon was asking, So FTL's inspired a lot of other indie space roguelikes. Are there any that you've had a chance to play and particularly enjoyed? Or do you make games so much you don't get time to play games?
Yeah, I mean, I try and touch on a lot of them, at least to check them out and see what's around. I can't remember the name. It was like Northern European and a whole bunch of letters. Is a word, like, but I don't remember what that word is. But there's no vowels in it. Anyways, there's been a couple. I don't know if Out There was inspired by FTL or not, but I really enjoyed Out There as well. Gosh, what was that game?
I'm trying to find it for you, Justin. I know the one you're talking about. It was fun. It was a good one. It was a good choice. It's a little bit older and was super interesting.
It was just all UI and just colored squares and rooms.
Yeah, it had a strong board gamey design. We probably shouldn't dive too much into that game, given that we can't even name it. But,
well, you should go play it. You should find it.
Yeah, this side tangent. I've been like trying to look at the theater chat with the delay. I'm like, quick, is anyone in the theater shouting?
I'm sure
like,
someone
please, it's this game. No one's got it yet. So
yeah, I play a lot of the games, but the one thing that I kind of
I got it.
Yeah,
it's Rhyme de Capsule. I'll toss in the chat. There we go.
Cool.
There we go.
Yeah, the one thing I haven't seen enough of that I want to see more is like actual crew and power management. I feel like is the one thing that like I thought was really maybe the coolest part of FTL. A lot of other people latch onto the stories and the text events and the random battles and all that sort of stuff. But I just want to see more micromanaging people to put out fires, like and like turning off oxygen or whatever, you know.
Yeah, the power element is one that you don't see very often. In general, though, I feel like I just want to see, take some inspiration, but then also make something completely new that can surprise us and surprise more developers down the line. I heard you asked Casey a similar question. It's so hard to say, I like this element of my game. I think everyone should use it. I think that's it's hard to say that, but I think it would be cool to just see more innovation and like really, really aggressive twisting the concepts on people. Would be fun.
Yeah, like I know Sunless Seas was partially inspired by FTL, and that's like completely different, and I love that game. Yeah,
that's an excellent game. I put many hours into that.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, it's hard to ask the question, what have you liked in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
Suddenly it all just falls out.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, even just between kind of the two major games. Like we have FTL, which is closer to like it's real time with pause, which means that there is some time to like sit and think, but also you've got that kind of like I find the stressful level if you're trying to move people between and react to things. So it's like somewhere between action style, but then with pause. But then you got Into the Breach, which is this like turn-based chess of a game, which is very interesting to me because I feel like they're two very different games in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, what was it like going between almost, you've got like these like turn-based strategy roguelike and almost something somewhere between action roguelike. Like, did you have a preference between the two in the end? Is it just that you like switching between?
I think we were just looking as a palette cleanser between FTL. Justin can hop in afterward and tell me if I'm crazy in my memory. But there's a lot of, in many ways, Into the Breach is almost a response to FTL in terms of the design elements that we were exploring with FTL that we ended up worrying about or not liking very much. Like FTL does lean a lot more into randomness than Into the Breach does. There's a lot more die rolls just when it comes to evasion and stuff like that. But there's also a bigger swings. Every game you play in FTL is a lot more of that pulling the casino slot machine, and you might get a huge spike with an amazing setup, or you might never find a shop and die burning in flames. While Into the Breach, we spent a lot of time kind of normalizing out the randomness and seeing how much you can experiment in that roguelike structure, and in a turn-based game that is a lot more like polished and designed down to its core. Like the squads are designed to be very, very self-sufficient without needing to find additional weapon drops. You have all the predicted attacks and all that stuff. Like there's just, we kind of are pulling the randomness out of everything, and kind of seeing where it led us. But Justin, do you have thoughts on what it was moving between them?
We don't really usually approach games with like, this is like the genre and type of game we want to make. Usually we kind of have like a goal of like an emotional state or like a feeling or something, and then we sort of just make the game that makes the most sense for that. And we just sort of stumble our way into genres, and figuring out what works for us along the way. So I'm sure it was because we were sick of working on FTL, but it's not. I don't think it was like a conscious decision. Like,
Yeah, that's fair. It was more of an influence on rather than like the driving factor on.
Yeah.
yeah.
That is really curious, that way of approaching games. What was like the core feeling of both the games, of FTL and Into the Breach?
FTL simply, captain of a starship. We want to feel like Adama or Picard or whatever. Into the Breach was more. Matt can correct me, but in my memory, it's just like a response to all the movies superhero movies where the city gets totally destroyed, and no one really seems to care, and they're like celebrating, yay, we did it. And so we wanted this feeling of collateral damage mattering, like you accidentally destroy the building and then you feel bad, or you're willing to sacrifice yourself to save the city. That was like the core conceit, although you did start with just like turn-based game, like let's do that as a start.
I started like just implementing a grid-based turn-based game with no real goal beyond that to begin with, and there's a different element of to carry on what Justin was saying, like in XCOM, which was definitely a huge influence on even wanting to go down that route to begin with, the Firaxis XCOM. You spend so much time hiding behind walls and kind of poking your head out that I was thinking about like, how can you make a turn-based game that you're not specifically avoiding damage, that there's a motivation to step out in front of damage and say, like, I'm the hero and you shoot me, I should be your target, not that other poor civilian over there. And so part of it's a similar vibe to the stuff Justin was talking about, but it was a small gameplay moment that I wanted to be able to have in the bridge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's also actually a question from Team Fizz about randomness, which you were talking about, kind of the response between FTL and Into the Breach. And so Team said how after Into the Breach, which is the most deterministic strategy game I've played, what value and use do you guys see in randomness for especially like turn-based non-card games? Like, do you feel like, you really think that people should be pushing harder on the taking out some of the randomness, or is that more just, it worked in your case? Like, what are kind of the thoughts you've ended up with there?
The funny part is we didn't really take out randomness so much as change the way it's presented and the way the player interacts with it. It's the you're given this random scenario of who's attacking who, and that's pure random. You have no control over what the enemy is doing, and what enemies spawn and that sort of thing. And then you have all your tools without any randomness to what happens from your own actions. They're like dice games on the tabletop side, where there's the type of dice game where you want to shoot someone, so you roll the dice and then you miss or hit, and you don't know what's going to happen before you roll the dice. And then there's the dice games where you roll the dice and you have 7 numbers in front of you, and you're going to place them to determine what your actions are going to be. And that feels less random in a way, because you get to work with the randomness handed to you instead of just that swing and a miss that you get, which is more the FTL style randomness. Well, Into the Breach is more the other type of randomness. I don't know if I did a great job explaining that, Justin.
Yeah. Input, output, randomness, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and that level of visibility, and like we're back at UX again, in some ways.
Yeah.
Can't
escape it.
Yeah.
It all comes back to UX, which is frankly fascinating for a roguelike topic, because I think that for better or worse, there's different opinions for sure in terms of how seriously roguelikes take UX. But I think there's a breadth between classic roguelikes, modern roguelikes, roguelites, all that. But...
Yeah, I kind of maybe one day would like to see like the classic roguelike with the best and the most clearest UI and just be like, what would that game be? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They're
Interesting.
working hard to make Dwarf Fortress more user friendly, and it'll be interesting to see how well they can pull that off.
Yeah.
That's a high goal. That's a hard task to undertake.
Yeah, I did user testing at university for NetHack for like a mod of it, and so I had to take random university students who'd never played anything and like get them to sit down and play NetHack, and like the cheat sheets were never enough. But yeah, there's a good question here from Nix, actually going back to what we were talking before about feedback and things, which was how do you deal with the vocal critics on things like Reddit and Discord, particularly when it goes beyond criticism and ventures into being disrespectful? Just like there's a lot of like popularity for your games, and so I'm sure that's a line. You have any tips you use for kind of taking care of yourselves and finding that balance?
I'm not entirely sure how, but we did cultivate a fan base that is very largely respectful and positive, and so they kind of mediate everything for us. Like they like shift the dialogue to be more positive, and um, I'm I'm not sure how we did that because we didn't really do much of anything online. Like we're largely quiet, and the way I personally deal with stuff like that is just simply not to look at it. I and I know that's a lot harder for other devs who really enjoy searching and reading about things, but personally, like I don't even want to watch videos of people who love the game playing it because I'm just like oh man, they're just like going through my underwear drawer and like having a great time. um, but I'm very happy they like it. I just don't seek out to read and watch that stuff. So that's how my mental health tip is never go online.
It's funny because FTL generated so much more vitriol than Into the Breach did, and I do wonder how much the games attract the audience, and the people who like Into the Breach tend to be less angry, or FTL was meaner, and so it pissed people off more. There are definitely more emails of like your final boss in FTL is horrible, but a lot more expletives in how they describe that. From my experience in terms of doing like customer support emails and the like, mostly your angriest person, if you will just respond nicely and explain things and and remind them that there's a human on the other side, it could go shockingly well. But we do sit in a position that we don't talk to that many people. We're not nearly as public facing as like Twitter for like where it's constantly, and so we stand from a position of privilege that it's not as much of an issue, and so it's much easier to diffuse it even when it does come up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something of a lightning round. We got. I'm sorry for all the people leaving questions that we didn't have time for. This one's good because it'll be a really fast yes, no. Was the aesthetic of Into the Breach inspired by that one Captain Planet Flash game from the 2000s?
No, never heard of it.
No.
I have no idea. Yeah.
There's your answer, Tack. No.
I'll have to look it up.
What are you most proud of in FDL? That's a super short question, right?
Surviving the release.
That's fair. I'll leave Justin at that. I think.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that represents you both. What are your opinions on the modding scene for your games? I actually find it super interesting that there's a whole modding scene, especially for Into the Breach.
I mean, it's super, super cool, and we did not expect how much people would like modding FTL, and so we tried to make it much easier for Into the Breach. So it's I don't know. I love to see. I love people making something they like into something else they like. Like that's fun.
Yeah, it's not the sort of thing you could possibly be angry at or unhappy with in any way. It's your biggest fans want to continue screwing around with your design ideas is nothing but a compliment to this situation. I wish that we had more time to support and make better tools for them, but Justin and I, it's a struggle enough to get a game out the door, much less to have like a full modding suite for people to be able to poke at it. But it is generally on my mind as something I don't want to break when I put out updates. I don't want to make it impossible. And we hope that the scripting within the breach would make things easier.
Yeah. A fun question from the Witch Smart. Is there something that inspired the races and creatures in your games, or did they just appear in your dreams?
A lot of it came down to what can I draw.
Did you give Tom? We had all the races before we hired on the writer for FTL, right, Justin?
Yeah, and I think we're very practical. We're just like, what is a mechanic that would be good for a race, and then what would be something that is visually distinct that would suit that. And so we always go backwards.
Yeah, we're big fans of like the obvious when it comes to implementing a mechanic and then representing it. Who's the guy who has a lot of health? It'll be the guy who's a rock. Who's the guy that he adds power to a room? Well, that's an energy, obviously. And it's just like that's the extent.
Who wants to stab you? It's a praying mantis.
Yeah,
exactly.
Stabby guy. Yeah.
Yet again, comes back to UX. That it is a form of UX. That it makes it easier if you're not asking people to remember a weird alien name. Or their background lore, or distinguishing the gray ones from the pink ones and what that means. If it's just like there's a big rock dude, you're pretty sure what he's going to do, and so you've solved a lot of like player introduction problems just by making obvious art and creature design. Yeah. And we tried to do a lot of similar stuff when it came to Into the Breach. They would drop the ball because we have dumb stuff like the scorpion shooting out webs and what was someone complained about recently? The mosquito is a squid, which doesn't make any sense.
Fair.
When that stuff came, I think that's a case of like Justin. I think you did do mosquito art at some point, right, Justin?
I did, and then gradually I couldn't draw that. Yeah,
and then we forgot to change the name, and now it's the mosquito is a squid.
Yeah,
so it's just entropy, basically.
Roll the dice.
It's the old warning with development that you should never put in placeholder that you don't expect to make it into the game, because it always will.
Yeah. I love that. Coming back to UX again in the end of like, if you have an enemy that's good at stabbing, give them sword for hands. Excellent. Well, and that brings us exactly to time, which just flew by. So thank you so much for making it, especially with time zones involved. It's been really awesome having you, and if you have a chance to hang out in the social space at all, awesome. Or if other people want to go talk, the Rogue breakout room is the one that we have assigned for this particular talk. But thanks so much for coming out. This has been super fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What room do we go to if we want to go chat?
Rogue.
Rogue.
Yeah, like the OG.
Sorry if I missed that and you said it. I was distracted by the chat down here.
That was good. So have fun, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.